it looks like it's working. Okay. I don't know where Lauren went. Where did Lauren go?
Okay, perfect, everyone. So I guess we're live. We'll go ahead and pass it off to you all for an amazing conversation. Serena, thanks so much for hosting this, and take it away.
Thanks, Jason. Good afternoon, morning, wherever you are. Welcome to today's panel on the intersection of eating disorders and sexual violence. My name is Serena Nangia. I use she, her pronouns. I am the CEO of an organization called The Body Activist that focuses on uplifting and supporting people of color and conversations around weight stigma. I also have personal experience with domestic violence and eating disorders, so very excited to be moderating our discussion today. This conversation is obviously so incredibly important as both eating disorders and experiences of sexual violence affect a lot of people. Often it's overlapping and really complex. And today we'll be exploring these connections, discussing the challenges in accessing support, and highlighting paths towards healing and advocacy. I do want to just mention that one of the first times I learned about the connection between sexual violence and eating disorders was through Roxane Gay and her book and stories and Hunger, which is the title of her book. So I just want to do a little shout out there. Excited to have all of these folks joining us today to share their experiences. I'll pass it first over to Liam and he'll get us started.
Sure. Hello, everybody. So excited to be here today. Yeah, I guess I will do a brief intro of myself, and then actually, I think I'm going to pass it to my colleague Lauren first, just to do a little call out of the folks who are here with us. So take it away, Lauren.
Great. Hi. I hope you can hear me right with that. I just moved rooms. I'm sorry. My name is Lauren Krupa. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Student Services for the UC Berkeley School of Public Health. And I have been a member of the Sexual Violence, Sexual Harassment Prevention Committee here at the School of Public Health for the last 6 years. And so we're very excited to be partnering for this event today. This is a part of a series of events and communications and things that we have going on throughout the year, just to kind of connect with prevention work and highlight sexual violence and sexual harassment as a public health issue and how it intersects with many other public health issues for that, and to connect with our community partners. So this is fantastic. If you're interested at all in getting involved or just becoming a part of it, we encourage you to reach out. I think we'll send out the email where you can communicate. It'll be included on a slide presentation for that. But yeah, we're thrilled and we would love to have more members and be able to expand even further the efforts that we have there. But yeah, just highlighting, this is another way that you can get involved if you're a student, or it's also unique in that it's a student, faculty, and staff committee here at Berkeley Public Health with a longstanding history. And it is so ingrained in the culture here at UC Berkeley School of Public Health that we are actually the group that developed our principles of community statements that we use for our school, and that has been used as an example across campus. So it just shows that far-reaching impact that we have. So I really appreciate it, and thank you for allowing me to introduce the committee.
Thanks so much, Lauren. I'll pass it over to Julia to introduce themselves.
I don't think Julia was able to join us this year.
Oh, okay.
No,
Okay.
yeah, I'm filling in for Julia.
Oh, my apologies.
That's okay.
Okay, Liam, back to you.
Okay, it sounds good. Yes, thank you so much, Lauren, for introducing the committee. I just wanted Lauren to go first because I'm a co-chair of the committee. I've been a co-chair for a couple years. I've been on the committee for the last 3.5 years or so, basically since I started working at the School of Public Health. My name is Liam Chavez. I use he, him pronouns. I am a survivor of sexual assault, stalking, and also in recovery from an eating disorder. This event, we had a similar event last year and it went super well. It was very well attended and it was very close to my heart as somebody who has experienced all of the things we will be discussing today. So yeah, one of our panelists unfortunately couldn't make it. And in the last year or so, I have I've been more open about my experiences, and I actually was recently recruited to the National LGBTQ plus Speaker Leadership Bureau for the National Institute on LGBTQ Domestic Violence Prevention. So I've been stepping into a world where I am using my experience to advocate for others, and I'm very excited to be doing that here today.
Thanks so much, Liam. Jacqueline, I would love for you to introduce yourself as well, and hear kind of why you're here.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name's Jacqueline Godby. My pronouns are she, they. I am from 180 Turning Lives Around, and we are a dual violence agency located in New Jersey. So we work with domestic violence and sexual violence survivors and also their families, which is really important as well. So I'm very happy to be here today just to give my knowledge on the sexual violence side of things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Apologies for that confusion at the beginning of this conversation. Very excited to hear y'all's experiences, and excited is a weird word for that, but thankful that y'all are here to share about this really important conversation. Liam, did you want to share a little bit from your slides, or do you want to just go into?
I think it's okay for us to move on. I guess like a quick content warning for folks who are here. I mean, you imagine we will be discussing experiences of sexual and domestic violence and eating disorders. If that is a challenge for anybody, we encourage you to do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And feel free to reach out to ANAD or to the Berkeley Public Health Committee, and we can help connect you to both national and local resources. Yeah, I think that's good. Thank you for asking. I also forgot to mention my intro. I'm also a certified advocate for survivors of sexual violence and domestic violence, and I volunteer with a local shelter. Yeah, sorry.
Thanks. Do you mind sharing what that means for people?
Yeah, absolutely. So I took a 70-hour training. It is mandated through the state of California. So basically what I do is the organization that I volunteer with is Tri-Valley Haven out in Livermore in the East Bay in California. I answer the crisis line where people call if they are in crisis for whatever reason. It could be related to sexual assault, it could be domestic violence, it could be homelessness, but I answer the phone. And I also am hoping to be a bedside advocate for people needing forensic exams for after sexual assaults. I have been signing up for shifts, but for probably a good thing, I have not been needed to go out yet. So that makes me happy that nobody has needed my support yet. But yeah, eventually that is the plan. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I just didn't know exactly what that meant, so I figured some other folks here might not either.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked.
And before we get into the conversation, I just want to thank ANAD for doing this day of conversation. Didn't mention it before, but both I am a support group leader for people in larger body support group. Liam has previously been a support group leader as well. And so if you don't know too much about ANAD, ANAD helps support people with eating disorders who are in recovery or are healing, get support. There's lots of different ways to receive support at no matter at what point you are at. If you're at the beginning of learning that you might have an eating disorder, if you are in long-term recovery, whatever the case is. And you can see at the bottom of the screen more about ANID as well as the helpline if you need any support. And as we go into this conversation, I want to just lay out some ground rules for respectful participation. So this is a brave space, which means we encourage open dialogue, which also prioritizes, while also prioritizing respect and care for one another. If at any point the discussion feels overwhelming, feel free to step out or take a break as needed, even for our panelists. Please be mindful that each person's experience is unique, and we avoid generalizing or making assumptions. In groups, we call this kind of like using I statements. And then due to the nature of this discussion, we ask that audience members hold their questions for now, though we encourage you to reflect and seek further resources after the panel. Like Lauren said, there will be an email going out. The goals for this event are to shed light on the connection between eating disorders and sexual violence, to discuss barriers to care and to support those who are struggling, and to share knowledge on healing, prevention, and available resources. So with that, we'll start the conversation. Let's start with the most basic question, which is also a very big question. As we discuss the connection between sexual violence and eating disorders, how do these issues overlap, and are there common underlying factors or trauma responses? Liam or Jacqueline?
I can get us started if that's all right, Liam. I spend a lot of time thinking about the connection because there are so many commonalities between those. And I think the first one is that anybody can experience either one of these things, right? Like it doesn't matter your age, your gender, your sexual orientation, your health. None of those things matter because we all have that potential. And there's also a really big connection to past trauma for both those who have an eating disorder and experience sexual violence. And I think the biggest one is the shame that can happen with both of those experiences. It's just, and the shame can be so profound for both groups. So especially when you're looking at that with an intersectional lens, the lap is so big between both.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything you said, Jacqueline. I think a couple things that came up for me around this question is the body and control. Sexual and domestic violence is all about controlling people, and eating disorders is all about control and controlling one's body and controlling one's food and one's exercise in a lot of cases as well too. I think isolation and hiding are quite common for all of these things. Something else that crossed my mind would be the brain-gut connection. So this would be through the vagus nerve, and that's the idea behind like fight or flight or rest and digest. So, or sympathetic versus parasympathetic. So basically sexual violence, domestic violence, that's going to activate your fight or flight, which is going to make it harder for your body to like rest and digest your food. So it's like, it's all very thorny and intertwined. And then the last thing I'll say is I think culture, especially Western American culture, really normalizes a lot of behaviors that contribute to sexual and domestic violence and eating disorders. Just yesterday, I was at a dentist appointment and I was listening to a woman brag about how she only eats one meal a day. And I was like, ooh, that was hard for me to hear.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. I know that a conversation we have a lot in the eating disorder field is about how connected trauma and eating disorders are, how there's often a direct link between this experience of trauma, which is like a loss of control, a loss over your body, a loss over your autonomy. And my basic understanding, and I'd love if y'all want to speak on this further, is just that eating disorders are often utilized as a way to regain control. There's a function to eating disorders, and it might not actually be regaining control over our bodies, but it feels that way in the moment. And so when a trauma, whether it's domestic violence, sexual violence, or other types of violence where you lose control, it's like, this is like a feeling of like, this is mine. I can't control anything. I can't control what just happened to me. I can't control what happened to me 10 years ago, but I can control my food. And that's kind of where my brain goes. It's like a baseline on this conversation. I don't know if there's anything further you'd like to add on that. But if not, we can go forward. So I wanted to transition more into a conversation on structural barriers to treatment and support. We often see resources for eating disorders that may not account for the way that sexual violence and trauma may play a role in a person's eating disorder recovery, which, as we know, like I said, trauma is deeply rooted in lots of people's eating disorders. What resources are available for eating disorders that account for trauma and sexual violence experiences, perhaps like on campuses at universities or community-based resources?
Yeah, I can start with that one. So I wanted to give a call out to the ANAD helpline, which you see ticker tape below your screen right now. That is how I got connected to my dietitian, who has been life-changing in my ability to care for myself and in recovering both from my eating disorder and from the harm that I've experienced in my life. I called the helpline and said, hey, I need a dietitian that is comfortable. I'm half Cuban. I said, are you comfortable with working with people of color and experience with, trauma, picky eating, because that's a whole nother thing I'll get into later. And they're like, okay, here's this woman and she's perfect. And it was totally free. I didn't have to pay anything. And they also helped me figure out, she took my insurance as well. So I didn't have to pay any money at all for 2 years when I saw her, which there's no way I would have been able to make as much progress as I have without that. In terms of campus solutions, so there are, for our folks who are dialing in from Berkeley, want to give a shout out to CAPS, the Counseling and Psychological Services Office. They have various groups and resources for folks who have been through violence or eating disorders. I was actually a member of a group for survivors when I was a student at Berkeley. They also have dietitians available through University Health Services. And of course, our good friends over at the Path to Care, which is the Gender-Based Violence Resource Center at UC Berkeley. And many, many universities have these kinds of resources as well. And then for me, I really took advantage of the Disabled Students Program when I was a student. They helped me get all of my work done so that I could actually graduate on time, which was a huge accomplishment for me, considering everything that I had been through. I still have my diploma on my wall. And it is not, unless there's like a huge earthquake, it's going to stay there.
Thanks so much for that, Liam. I'd love to pass it over to Jacqueline, share some of your work as well and resources you found.
Yeah, I find that that can be such a barrier to find what works for you. I mean, because we're all different, right? Like some of us may have insurance, some may not, or maybe we don't have a copay, maybe our copay $75, right? Like it can vary so much. So that really can limit what you have access to. Like, yes, like it is so wonderful to have your therapist, right? But finding a therapist who is specialized specifically in sexual related trauma can be so hard to find. I know here at our agency, and we serve people in Monmouth County in New Jersey, like what a gift that we have somebody who is so specialized in sexual violence as a clinician. It's so valuable. But I mean, ultimately, like finding somebody who's trauma informed is the foundation of any work, because you need trauma informed work to feel safe and be able to actually work through what comes up with you. So in the event that you can't find somebody who's very knowledgeable in both eating disorders and violence, like trying to see what you do have access to, and then layering in all of the factors of insurance and the logistics of getting to appointments and all of that. But yeah, I mean, I think of all the barriers that come up.
I know that you mentioned in your intro that you work at 180 Turning Lives Around. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're the Dual Violence Agency in Monmouth County, New Jersey. So my particular role is managing the advocates on our sexual assault response team. So they respond countywide. They do much of what Liam described. So New Jersey has a very similar model with forensic exams. And I can say what a gift it is whenever you do have multiple shifts without a call. Although, like, yes, you want to get in there. It's at the same time, it's a gift, right? Knowing that you're still available, but you haven't had to be called. So it's incredible work. So you can always look for agencies in your area by using RAIN or the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. Sometimes there are statewide coalitions. New Jersey is one that has one. There's an amazing one in California. Not every state has a statewide coalition. So RAIN usually steps in to help with that organization of all of the agencies within the county. I will warn you, if you go through RAIN, they will use your area code of your phone number. So if you moved, you might get redirected back to your old area code. So again, that's a little irritating, right? But that's just, another thing that we have to deal with and know when we're navigating.
Absolutely. That's really helpful tidbit information that you only learn from having been in the space. I'll say, like, my journey with finding support for healing from domestic violence was one of the first places that I started before I even knew that I had an eating disorder, that I had an eating disorder in the first place. I started going to a support group online, virtual, anonymous. I don't remember what organization it was through, but I started going to a support group, and to be honest, I think a lot of resources aren't fully eating disorder informed or eating disorder informed at all. Like Jacqueline said, I think starting with somewhere that's trauma informed can be really supportive. Something that I know a lot of us have to do as advocates for ourselves and advocates for our family and our friends and our people is to really pull together lots of different resources and kind of build our own teams. And what that means is, like, we're not always going to be showing up to places that are fully safe and understand all of our experiences. And that was my experience. I think being a person in a larger body or as a fat person, there's a lot of diet talk and disordered eating talk that comes up in domestic violence spaces and domestic violence healing spaces, because it is a part of our experiences for a lot of people. And so just being prepared in whatever space you're in to have the boundaries that you need to set as far as, like, if you're going to show up somewhere and they say something when you're like, I need to leave, then leave. Finding places that are safer. If you feel comfortable, have the energy to educate the support group leaders or fellow people. It's always it can be empowering. It was for me. But it's eating disorders are complicated. They're not really talked about a lot in spaces, even with trauma. So that's what I found. Jacqueline, you mentioned a little bit about this, and so did you, Liam, about financial aspects of finding support. So I wonder, how does poverty or financial instability, low income folks, how does that limit their access to recovery resources? And how can we support those vulnerable populations, which personally, like, I haven't personally experienced, but I have friends who have. We all know people who still deserve care. Everyone deserves care, even if they don't have money. And how do we support them, including people who are undocumented or have limited access to any sort of resources, not just money?
I think one of the biggest pieces is if you're doing a referral, right, whether as an advocate or wherever you refer people to, ideally that should be a very warm referral, a warm handoff, because at the end of the day, that is trauma informed, right? So you're not, referring queer people to a space that's not safe for queer people to be in. That's a really important piece. Um, but also just having people who are properly trained in spaces like mine, right? Because there are survivor funds out there. There's things like the Victim of Crime Compensation Office in New Jersey. There's models of that throughout all of the states. If you don't know about it, you need somebody to tell you about it right ahead of time and not down the line when you're like, oh, I wish I would have known that then. And the fact that like you don't get charged forensic exam, but you may get a bill from the hospital because you still checked into the hospital in the first place, right? So having like the people that I manage properly trained so that way they can communicate that to somebody who calls on the hotline to let people make the best informed decision for them and their finances, right? Because everybody does deserve access to this, but that doesn't mean that there's not barriers. Even if you have insurance, maybe you don't feel comfortable because you're on your parents' insurance, you don't want them to see, or maybe it's your spouse who abused you and you don't want them to know that you went. So I think just looking at it with again, I say this all the time, a trauma informed lens, like just respecting survivors and like their right to that self-determination, right? Like, doesn't matter what, internally we may like, oh, well, yeah, that would be best practice. It doesn't matter at the end of the day because it's up to the survivor, to choose what they feel is right for them because, they know themselves best, not us.
To add on to that, my personal experience, financial instability has been a huge contributor to how challenging my life has been the last few years. I, at one point, was working 3 jobs. I was so busy just trying to make ends meet, just trying to pay my rent and pay for my meals. It got to the point where like a protein bar was dinner. It was that bad. It was really, really hard. And the particular flavor of eating disorder that I have dealt with, in addition to just restriction, is I have a very sensitive palate. There's actually a condition, it's called ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. I kind of have like a version of that. It's not full blown because I do have some body dysmorphia and whatnot. But basically, like certain textures, flavors, I will not touch. Like I didn't eat certain vegetables for like a decade because they were so unpleasant. And it became a thing where like people would say, oh, you should go to the food bank. Well, I knew if I went to the food bank, I wouldn't eat anything that they gave me. So part of the work with my dietitian has actually been helping me get to a point where I can tolerate those foods so I can go to the food bank if I need to. And I also just didn't have time. I didn't have time when you're working 3 jobs to, take the time to go to an additional group or something like that. It was so almost impossible. Looking back, I'm a queer trans man. I was a patient at a community health clinic for trans and queer people. They were aware that I was a survivor of sexual violence, and I wish that they had screened me or maybe done some kind of education about eating disorders, and maybe informed me of the potential for this to happen, because I really didn't know. I didn't know that there was such a strong link between eating disorders and sexual violence. And I really would love to see like community health clinics advertise these kinds of groups like ANAD's helpline, like ANAD's free support groups, which was instrumental in my recovery. Just on the wall somewhere, or maybe a clinician can recommend it, because that is where a lot of vulnerable people end up. Like I'm thinking about the low-income queer people of color, undocumented people. Those are the safe havens where they're going to get medical care. And if we can help connect them to these free or low-cost services, I think that would be really transformative for a lot of folks.
That's a great call-in for community health organizations and centers to really, I mean, everywhere should, in my opinion, should be screening for eating disorders. They are the second deadliest mental illness or mental health condition. So I also wanted to bring up that conversation around undocumented folks and seeking help. We know that there was a lot of instability around SNAP back in November, which caused a lot of instability, food insecurity among people who have access to SNAP, which is, for those who don't know, is a government subsidized food resource, so people can buy food with that money. There are a lot of restrictions. There's a lot of issues as well, but often undocumented folks might not have access or at all, like anything related to government subsidized support because they're undocumented and they can't show up in the same way. So one thing that I found really supportive in a way of supporting other people is mutual aid networks. We talk a lot about it in communities of color and in our queer communities, but what this can look like is if you have friends or people in your community who need access to food, like committing to giving a certain amount once a month to a family, to supporting your local like food banks and shelters. But related, Liam, to what you said about RFID, there's this really cool group of people, these two moms who have an Instagram account called Help Get Safe Foods. And it's two moms on a mission to make sure everyone, including those with RFID and other unique food needs, get meals they deserve. Because like you said, food banks don't always have foods that work for people with RFID, and also people with specific nutrition requirements based on chronic illnesses or allergies and that sort of thing. So I really rely on community as well as our institutions to support people who aren't supported as often as they should be and who still need support. I also wrote down, as y'all were talking about financial instability and insurance and not wanting, like if you're a kid or a person, you're on your parents' insurance. I know military is a big one where it's like you maybe don't feel comfortable going through TriWest or TRICARE because you feel understandably that your career will be impacted if you seek out mental health resources. And so I know that there are quite a few veteran and active duty resources that are available, but I don't know if y'all know of any in particular off the top of your head. I'm just throwing that out there.
I can look this up, but there is a specific hotline for people in the military who have been assaulted. I can find that while we are on this call, so that way I can give it to you.
Yeah, feel free to interrupt me. And then the other thing I want to mention before we go on to our next question is what we all talked about is kind of this intersectional lens through which we look at violence and recovery and eating disorders. We can't separate the fact that people with marginalized identities, including people of color, specifically Black folks, trans people specifically, are experiencing a lot of systemic violence as well as interpersonal violence. And so when those of us who are in this space and work in this space, look at things through that lens. And so I just encourage anyone who's learning about this conversation to discover and dive into kind of how intersectionality, specifically how identities and systemic violence towards certain people with certain identities impacts the landscape of all this work. And with that being said, a conversation that we could have is also how can stigma within families or communities prevent individuals from naming their experiences or seeking support? I'm going to start very briefly with thinking about I'm half Indian, Asian Indian, and within the space that I grew up in, and maybe this is common amongst all sorts of families, we don't talk about what's happening at home outside the house. So even though there was domestic violence happening, and I was like, someone should help me, please, as a child, we did not do that. It's just not a thing we do. We don't barely even talk about the positive things that happen in the house. So I think stigma coming from a mixed household where a dominant man is the abuser is very relevant to my experiences specifically within Indian culture, and how men are seen as kind of this, like, can't do any wrong in some ways. So it's kind of complicated, but I can't really say it shortly. But I'll pass it over to Liam or Jacqueline to share their perspectives. I'll throw this question in the chat also.
Sure, I can speak on that. Stigma is something I have dealt with for most of my life, as I imagine a lot of us have. So similar to you, I grew up in a family that had incredibly strict control over my diet and over food. Very, very diet culture heavy family. And I only realized about a year ago that a lot of the eating disorder behaviors I was engaging in was mimicking what I had grown up with. And a lot of fat phobia and diet culture really praises the idea of restriction and dieting. I'm also a competitive swimmer, so a lot of athletes are really sometimes engage in these disordered behaviors, and it's praised. Like, oh, good for you, you're losing weight, you're going to get faster, blah, 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 which that is not necessarily always true. Being Cuban American, was raised to be very, very independent, not rely on anybody, don't speak about my challenges, keep those to myself. And I will also say I was kept away from quite a few resources after my experience with sexual violence because of my gender. Quite a lot of support groups are only available to women. And I just didn't get care for a really long time because of that. And it's really harmed me as a result. And the last thing I'll speak of is I think it's incredibly challenging for people who come from marginalized communities to report or even speak about their experiences of sexual violence specifically. For me, I won't get into it too much, but as a trans man, early on in my transition, I used to wear a garment called a chest binder, which basically, it's kind of like a vest, and it flattens the chest, so it creates a more masculine silhouette. I had been wearing this at the time of my assault, and when I reported my assault, it was taken as a sexual titillating thing, like I was trying to seduce the person who harmed me, and that is just absolutely not true. And it was one of the most difficult things that I had to deal with. Honestly, I would put it on par with the actual assault. It was that traumatic. And that's the kind of thing that's going to prevent people from reaching out and seeking support in the first place.
Thank you for sharing, Liam. And thanks for being so vulnerable with us. Jacqueline, do you have anything you want to share on this?
Yeah, I will go ahead and quickly add about the military sexual trauma support. So there is, I know, some people may not be comfortable using it. There's a national DoD, which is the Department of Defense. They have a safe helpline. It's a 24/7. It's a national one. There was also the development of an app called Beyond MST. MST is military sexual trauma. The VA has given this out many times, and that's information that's not supposed to go back to them. Like, it's meant to be a trauma informed app. I can't say I haven't personally used these, so I can't speak to what the app itself is like very much. But I know, like, we give out the national DoD safe helpline, like, as part of like our resources. And most like, there are like sexual assault like response coordinators within the military, also. So if somebody is comfortable going through that system, but within the last, I want to say 5 years, there was a study done of people who had self-reported as having military sexual trauma versus what the Department of Defense had counted in their numbers. And with that, only about 30% of people had reported there, but they were comfortable disclosing in that survey. So, I mean, we know that happens with people from a variety of communities. So I just wanted to throw that in there for some support. To tack on, like, similar to what Liam was saying, I think a big piece is that an agency or somebody can say, you can trust me all of the time, right? Like, you can trust me, like, I'm here to support you, right? But trust has to be earned at the end of the day. So that's incredibly important with, especially immigrant communities, right? Like, it usually takes, that's word of mouth, usually. Like, how can you prove that you're safe for me to work with? So I think especially being inclusive to queer people is so important, right? Like, you serve everybody, not just women, right? Like, because everybody can, experience sexual violence. So, yeah, I think that trust is earned.
100%. Well, obviously there's a lot of stigma within this conversation, within even just conversations, let alone seeking support. So I highly recommend reaching out to organizations that are already a part of this conversation, that are working to counteract this stigma, because that's what they're there for. We talked a little bit about specifically trauma responses, eating disorders in people with marginalized identities already. I will say that as a baseline, eating disorders are seen often as this white girl problem, which is a very big stigma and barrier to accessing care, or even thinking that eating disorders are possible in communities of color and male communities. And so there's a lot that we could have another conversation on that. But I recommend looking at other data conversations, because other folks are talking about this specifically. We are going to offer, if anyone has questions for us that we can answer for you, or add our little tidbits, please feel free to put it in the chat. I believe that there is a way to do that. And we're happy to answer any questions that come through that are appropriate. But I'll move forward on the next question, because I do think this is really important. How do eating disorders and sexual violence relate to one's relationship with sex and self-pleasure? Who wants to start?
I'll go ahead and get us started on this. I think that's a really big topic. There's a lot of, I think, nuance around it, especially because some survivors don't always describe pain with their assault, right? And just like the confusion that can bring up within people when you're having to sit and process that, especially like if your body did respond to some pleasure. That doesn't mean that's every survivor's experience, but that does happen. It's not talked about, unfortunately. But, when we think about the ways that we heal from different traumas, it's different when the trauma happened within our own physical bodies, right? It's not like we can check out, lock the door, and be done with our bodies, although it would be nice sometimes, right? But it's not like that, right? Like we could avoid, a place on the street that we had saw a car accident, right? That was very traumatizing. We can avoid that street. We can't avoid our bodies. So it requires a lot of patience, and giving yourself so much grace throughout the process, because it does look different for everybody, and learning what you're comfortable with, especially if you are partnered already, like finding safety within that partnership again can be a lot of work. And that's why it's, not just important that the survivor has access to support, right? But that way the survivor's significant others, right, whether a romantic partner, family member, what have you, that they have support too, because they want to support, the survivor at the end of the day as well.
Just to piggyback off of that, we are all stuck in our own bodies, for better or for worse. We can't leave. And I think that has been a continual challenge of mine, is I often don't feel safe in my body. And it's very challenging to be intimate because of that. For example, I've mostly given up online dating because I see everybody as a potential threat who is on my recommendations, both the stalking and the sexual violence I experienced were facilitated through online dating platforms. So that it's really hard for me to think of other people as potentially safe, or let alone as a potential partner. I'm really trying to work on how can I love myself wholly and be kind to my body, especially when right now the world is really pathologizing me as somebody with chronic illness, and especially as a trans person. It is impossible to get away from. And I really want to get better at setting boundaries with people. Like it may even just be like, a stranger wants to give me a hug. I don't really like hugs from strangers. And I'd like to get better at saying, no hugs, please.
Thanks. Thank you both for sharing. On the hug thing, so I'm a stranger who loves to hug people. However, I learned a long time ago that it's actually not that awkward or weird to be like, "Are you a hugger?"
Mm-hmm.
Before, and I've had people say no, and it's like, cool, high five or whatever, like, or just no physical contact. As someone who hasn't experienced sexual violence but truly cares about the community and people who have, it is our job as allies or just as human beings to take that seriously and to know that we never know what someone has been through. You shouldn't be touching people randomly. So that's a big important conversation, or just fact. I want to take the self-pleasure conversation here. So I do not have experience with sexual violence. I do have experience with domestic violence and eating disorders. But I want to say that my journey with self-pleasure has been so supportive of my recovery. Like we've talked about, eating disorders can be related. For me, it was related to like feeling out of control, and this just kind of popped up. I didn't mean for it to. It wasn't an intentional thing for like, how do I control my life? But there was so much going on at home, that domestic violence that was existing. I didn't know how to manage it, and I didn't have any coping skills. I was young, but also like, this is something that people shouldn't have to deal with. So I went into very restrictive habits. And my experiences with self-pleasure and exploring self-pleasure have allowed me to find this expansiveness that I didn't allow myself to have when I was experiencing disordered eating and my eating disorder. As a person in a larger body, this aspect of sexuality and self-pleasure and sensuality is really special to me, because it's something that we're told that we're not allowed to have. and or that it's exoticized, or it's or we're just not sexualized at all. So for me, self-pleasure, and not being someone with sexual violence history, self-pleasure has been a tool of liberation, of allowing myself to be joyful and expansive, like I said, in ways that my eating disorder and the domestic violence I experienced really tried to keep me caged. And self-pleasure, to me, is the opposite of that. I see a question from the audience, so we'll do that. So the question is, I'd like to know how/why domestic and sexual violence causes an eating disorder.
I can speak to that with my personal experience. So I want to caveat this by saying there are many different things that can trigger an eating disorder, not just experiences of violence. I've been told by my dietitian that it's very interesting the way that it works is genetics has a big role in it too. Like I might come from a family where eating disorders are more likely to happen, and then something like sexual violence might set it off. So it's very complex, and I won't get into it that much because I'm not an expert on that. But for me, the way that it manifested was I would often feel really nauseous if I was triggered. It still happens to me today if I get triggered in some way, and I won't want to eat because of that. It'll be so uncomfortable. I'll feel like gagging, and unfortunately, that's a pretty common experience for a lot of survivors. So for me, that's kind of how it happened, and then it just got to the point where the more it happened, I would notice, oh, I feel really sick while I'm eating this food. Okay, I'm going to cut it out because I don't want to feel sick anymore. But it wasn't really the food that was making me sick. It was like this, physical reaction to the trauma that I had been through. So I think at any point, potentially, it could have been caught or stopped, but it wasn't for myriad reasons about, my background, who I am, that sort of thing. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. And I will also say it can also manifest in a lot of different ways. I know I've been talking about restriction. That is how I gravitated towards this, but it can be the opposite. A lot of folks engage in overeating, binge eating, binging, purging. I recently spoke to a client on the phone who is an inmate in a prison who had experienced sexual harassment from prison officials, and he had been binge eating as a way to cope. And I asked him, like, why do you think you're doing this? And he said, it's because I don't want to feel attractive. I don't want to feel like a target to the people who are harassing me in prison, which I think that was really perceptive of him to notice that, because it took me a really long time to realize why I was doing it. So it can really run the gamut. It's so individual based off of what everybody has experienced. And I should also say, having grown up in a family with toxic dynamics, some DV going on, there was a lot of stress around food in general. If there was often the violence happened in the kitchen, which is something I only realized recently, which is really curious. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Liam. That had me thinking a lot about how, going back to power and control, right? Like a piece of that can be like what you consume when you consume it, right? Especially if you're pairing in the intimate partner sexual violence, or trauma to the mouth, or an assault specifically around the mouth. That can make it, hard to even go to the dentist, right? But let alone like what you intake, what you do put in your mouth. So like even like liquids could become hard, no matter what it is. So it really is different for everybody. And I also want to give a little, I want to give some acknowledgement that there are people who already have an eating disorder who can be assaulted, right? So sometimes that could lead to a progression of something, or maybe somebody was in recovery and was like, no, I've been great for a long time. And then suddenly they're not, right? So like it's not it's not linear. And I think that's really important to remember. I mean, same if somebody does not having an eating disorder and they're a survivor of domestic or sexual violence, right? Like recovery is never linear.
Mm.
Absolutely. The only thing I'd add here is eating disorders are often, like I said, functional. They are a maladaptive or unhealthy coping mechanism for some people. And so whenever we're trying to deal with what's happened to us, for some people, it turns into an eating disorder. It turns into, like I said, this one thing that you can control. But it's so much more nuanced, as Liam and Jacqueline explained. So we're reaching the end of our conversation. I don't know if we have any more questions from the chat. But if you do, we are available. I'd love for both of y'all to share again where people can find you and the resources that your organizations offer.
Sure, I'll go. Again, my name is Jacqueline, and I am based in New Jersey in Monmouth County. I'm with 180 Turning Lives Around, a dual violence agency. If there's anything I can help get you connected to, I'd be more than happy to do that. If you're interested in our website, because we have information on our website too that anybody could read. It's 180nj.org. I also encourage you to reach out to RAIN, the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. There's also I believe it's the hotline.org is really great for finding some domestic violence resources, but wherever you are, like there is always somewhere to go, I promise.
I just sent, unfortunately, I can't put my resources in the chat, but I did send it to folks to put it in. Oh, there we go. It's in the chat. You can see our website for our committee. You can also send us an email, whether you're in Berkeley or you're elsewhere. We would love to partner with you. I know something we considered speaking more about were undocumented survivors, considering everything that's going on, but we didn't feel we felt that deserved an entirely its own event. It's much too large and much too important to just be a little footnote in this kind of conversation. So if that's you, please reach out to us. You can also, I think I'll put my email in the chat if you, like I said, I am now a speaker. If you would like to work with me, feel free to send me an email. This has been great. And I just in our last couple minutes, I just wanted to speak about one of the last questions that we had on the sheet, which is about handling the recovery process, processing trauma and things like that. I just wanted to share some little pearls of wisdom that I think could be really meaningful for folks. So something that I've tried to work really hard on in the last year is tying my recovery to my values. And what do I value about the world? What do I value about others? What do I value about myself? So, and a lot of that has been unpacking the diet culture and the fat phobia that I was raised in, because I think about people in my life who I really care about, who are fat or who are in larger bodies. I would never speak or treat to them the way that I speak or treat myself. So I think that has been a really meaningful way for me to find healing and recovery. And also considering that, I've experienced quite a lot of violence in my life. And why should I be violent against myself with withholding food or something like that? That's not right. That doesn't speak to the values that I actually have. So I just wanted to share that's been particularly powerful. If that's anything that anybody is dealing with, I find that really looking inside and what do you value about the world and about yourself it's been a very, very powerful tool.
Thank you so much, Liam. Absolutely. I'll end with something I've been talking about in group, which is I decide to recover because they don't want me to, meaning the oppressors. Sometimes recovery for ourselves can be really hard, but against the oppressors is a little bit easier. So thank you all so much for joining us. And I believe we're at time. And thanks to Anna.